today. The poll questions you see were oriented around your experience with Databricks. The assumption is that you're new to Databricks. It's the whole goal here is to give you an opportunity to be introduced to Databricks and just basically learn a little bit about it if you've not seen it before. One thing I will clarify is in this case, we will be focused on doing this in Azure. So if you plan to use Databricks in a different environment or Databricks directly, just be aware that all of our examples and the notebook that'll be available to you for reference later it's all going to be focused on Azure. So let's jump right in and get started here. A little bit about me. I've been around this a while, 20 years with BI and Azure. Everybody brags about all their certifications, so I thought I'd throw mine up there. The big thing here is be aware that on my blog, there'll be a follow-up blog post to this presentation as well, so you'll be able to find information here. Any Q&A, I'll try to get it out there if there's additional things I can answer in regards to that, as well as I'll be making this notebook available through that, and I'll work with Crystal, see if it's something we can make available otherwise, but you'll probably just need to hit my blog up. So, all right, what is this whole Azure Databricks thing? And I'm only going to spend a few minutes on this because really the focus is actually getting you kicked off. But the big thing to remember is Databricks is actually the team that built Databricks is a team that are the primary contributors to Apache Spark. So Databricks is built on Apache Spark, which is built on top of the Hadoop infrastructure back in the day, which we don't talk about that as much as we used to. A lot of people now have just primarily switched to Spark as their primary use case. We're working with data lakes. So when we talk about data lakes, when we talk about machine learning, we talk about all this stuff where a lot of times we're talking about stuff that is actively worked in Hadoop clusters and Databricks clusters and those kind of things. So the Databricks product and Microsoft, they have a partnership, and you can actually get Azure Databricks, which we're going to show you today how to be able to work with that and leverage that on your own. So what's nice about it is Databricks is constantly being improved. Those improvements are constantly being pushed to Azure due to their partnership, so you're always going to be on top of your game around this. And keep in mind, this is intro level. Databricks is a small product. I have to be really clear. The entire solution covers so many things, even within the Azure ecosystem. You look at what's here, right? So we have all these folks that are using this, follow some common paradigms in the science world, using notebooks, uses common languages out there like Python and R. And Scala. These are just things, you can use it all in this concept. So as you start to look at what's available in Databricks, there's a lot there. Today, we're going to be focused on creating a simple notebook, moving some data around, doing some data manipulation, do some visualization. But I just want you to be aware that this is a key part of the ecosystem that is what we do in Azure. Pragmatic has been using Databricks in a lot of cases for ETL transformations and in some machine learning scenarios. And in streaming, we've actually used it in pretty much everything on the application side there. And we find that the flexibility this gives us and the capability the tool gives us from a scaling standpoint and the ability to manage a lot of different types of data requests and requirements makes it really a tool of choice for us. So just be aware that as we continue to move forward with Databricks, so we look forward to continue to do more. And like I said, our teams are constantly learning, and this is one of those areas that we're spending some quality time continuing to learn and develop and deliver for our customers. Today's plan. So by the way, we're almost at the end of my slide deck, so you're welcome. Today's plan. A couple things you need to know. If you're running dual screen and you want to do this with me, this is set up to actually let you do that. We'll be able to, like I said, we'll get you the notebook when we're done so you can actually take a part of the code, use that code. But a couple things you need to know. So in order to replicate this demo or to participate along the way, you're going to need to use a pay-as-you-go subscription. So one of the things about Databricks is it's a clustered solution, which means it has a heavy core count usage. And typically speaking, if you're running the $100 free or you got a free type scenario, it doesn't have the core count available to actually run any type of Databricks scenario. So first of all, you're gonna have to set up the pay-as-you-go account, which should make all of you nervous because frankly, you got to put a credit card on that. And if you exceed that information, it's a problem. Now, we'll show you, but Databricks offers a 14-day trial that you can use in order to learn and experiment with Databricks on Azure that allows you to basically experience, and that's what we're going to walk through today. If you have a Visual Studio subscription, also known as MSDN subscription, and you have credits available to that, you can use that subscription and use those credits because those credits will can be consumed. Actually, you can get the core count a part of that subscription. So that's really what happens. You're not really consuming any money except for the storage that we'll use for some of our data. So our plan for today, and we only have a short time together, so there may be more stuff we don't get to, but you'll get the entire notebook with all the pieces in it. But we're going to look at how you add Azure Databricks to your subscription. We're going to review the workspace. We are going to set up a cluster, work with some data, and we'll even get to the visualization side if we get some time to do that. Before we kick off in the notebooks, a couple things that I will be talking about, and I put them here for reference, is this thing called magic commands. I thought this was hilarious the first time I actually worked with Databricks, but magic commands are basically allow you in a notebook to change the type of code that you're running within a command section of your notebook, and you'll see what I mean when we dig into that. Today we'll be making our notebook, because you basically give your notebooks a primary language. So our primary language we'll be using today is Python, but you'll see us actually use the %SQL for the SQL statements. We're going to run some SQL against some of our code. We'll use a file system commands just to so we can see once we've connected, we can explore the data that we have, and then we use Markdown because Markdown makes your notebooks look good. So there we go. So let's get this thing kicked off. And first thing we do is get out of the PowerPoint. You're welcome. All right, I'm gonna be working off of 2 accounts today because I'm gonna set up one and then I'm gonna go to one that's already set up so we can actually walk through the notebooks. But I want to make sure. Let's see. Sorry. There we go. Gotta get to the right one. So this account that I have here is actually is running my off of my MSDN or my Visual Studio subscription. And I just want to walk you through the process of creating. We're going to create it. It'll take time. I'm not going to waste time watching things get created in Azure. We're going to jump over to the completed notebook that you saw on my other subscription so we can actually start working with it. But as you can see here, this is running my Visual Studio Enterprise subscription that I have and the points I have. So let's walk through the basics. And remember, this is a ground up. If it's all familiar to you, congratulations, this is review. If you've not seen this before, I want to walk you through all the pieces that you're going to have to take into account. So in my case, I actually have a resource group created. I'm going to add this to my resource group and simply search for Databricks. And you can see here we got Azure Databricks. We're going to go ahead and pull this up. It goes through this whole process, talks through, hey, you're going to create this cool stuff. You're going to get a workspace, and it tells you everything you need to know except for the fact that there's a free option. So let's go ahead and create this. We get in here, we're going to just do some basic stuff. We're going to throw it into our resource group we already have. You can see the subscription I'm using. My workspace in this case will be, let's do PW webinar. And we're going to stick this in this case, I'm going to put this out in US West for now. West US, there we go. Let's just throw this in West US. And we're going to leave, so you can see here in the pricing tier, this is the first thing you need to be aware of that we're going to change. We're not going to leave this to the standard pricing tier. We're going to go down here to this trial premium. And what this is, it gives us 14 days within a reasonable amount of size to actually create our first Databricks service. So when the first thing to be aware of is this is a great thing that Microsoft and Databricks have made available to us, allowing us to work with Databricks, learn the tool, and basically work at the premium level and just experience the process of working in Databricks. So let's go ahead and do review and create. It's going to tell us, hey, do you really want to do this? We're going to say yes, and we're going to create it. So right now, this is actually deploying out my Databricks thing. As you can see, it's underway. This can take anywhere from 3 or 4 minutes to longer, depending on how busy the Azure data centers are and where you put it at. So I just want you to be aware that we're not going to sit around and, oh, look at that, we're done already. See? So this is what happens. Oh, it looks like it's still refreshing. Actually done. It just says, it looks like it's done, but it's not quite there. All right, so it's still deploying out, and we may come back to this, we may not, but this just lets you know. I just want you to be aware of how to, to create it. Make sure you're using the right subscription. So we're going to jump over to my Databricks thing here. So when, let's see, I close my portal. Let's go to the portal real quick so you can see what we have. So on my Databricks service, when you log into Databricks, and I'm using dark theme so I don't forget which subscription I'm in, so everybody's clear on that. So I created this DOW, Data on Wheels, Databricks 01. This is my Databricks service that I have created. You can see that this was created in West US 2, running on my pay-as-you-go subscription. And I am running the premium tier just like we did created. Now, what you'll notice right away is there's not a whole lot of information out here because a lot of that has to do with the fact we're going to actually run it in the workspace. So there's a lot of opportunities here to walk through your documentation, the how-tos, just things to learn and know. You can get to right from the service page in the portal. If you click Launch Workspace, it will actually launch this workspace. So in my case, you can see that I have a workspace created here, and it has my user, Steve at dataonwheels.com. And if I go, let's go up to home here and just make sure we're all in the. This is what you'll see when it opens up, right? So you give the opportunity to create a new notebook, create some tables, some common tasks here. Before we get started here, let's go ahead and I'm going to walk you through the cluster because I want to make sure that you have that running because you can't actually run code without a cluster. So I'm actually currently running, but we're going to show you how to create the cluster. I'm not going to finish this out, not using this one, see? So this is my not using this one cluster. And what you're going to see is a couple things here. So like we're running our cluster on 7.1, the one I'm using for my example. So basically just grab the latest deployed version. I didn't grab a beta version because, well, beta is beta. You can see here when it default sets up, this is what we talk about core count. So right now it's using a DS3 V2, which has 4 cores in it. And we're going to set it up to run a minimum workers and maximum workers. Now, when I did my environment, the one I have running my other cluster, I actually had to reduce the max workers down to 4. And the reason I did that was to actually make sure that I didn't run out of cores because I got a core count error. It's also the reason I'm not going to create this new cluster because I don't have enough cores available to me in my trial version right now that lets me just run cores. Now, I've done this with a number of other folks, and if you have multiple people inside your company and all of you are using your pay-as-you-go account, and maybe you have a development account that you share or a subscription you share, and you try to do this, you will quickly run out of cores, depending on how you're set up. So just be aware that you set it up. You can do things like reducing the worker type, so you can actually say, hey, you know what, instead of running on 4 cores, looks like 4 cores is a minimum. So you might be able to get down. Yeah, there's no real option here. Used to be. Let's see if still 8. Yeah, so it looks like 4 cores is your minimum amount anyway. So that's kind of where you're at. That's changed a little bit in the past. They let you go a little bit lower, but it probably just doesn't perform. So just be aware this is kind of default setup. Recommend you look at doing this. The other things that are here, these are really important. Enable auto scaling says, hey, you're going to start out with minimum. So when it does the estimate, it makes sure that you can actually go to 8 cores, even if it doesn't allocate them. I want to be clear on that. So if you don't have the ability to go to 8 workers, which in this case would be 32 cores, actually 64 cores total because you have the driver and worker, this will let you say, hey, just make sure you understand where we are. And then the terminate after 120 minutes of activity is a great way to make sure your cost savings are in place. You can actually terminate it sooner. So if you're actually working in a true pay-as-you-go environment, you can actually shut the cluster down, and it'll automatically shut down and not cost you the money. And it'll reallocate. It takes some time to spin the cluster back up, but at least you can turn it off for a little while. So I jumped over there just to make sure you understand what you need to do when you're creating a cluster, because you really can't run any code until you have a cluster in place. All right. Now, we go back to the home page, and typically speaking, you're going to start with a new notebook. So let's go and grab our workspace here and users, and then we are going to say create a notebook. So today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at a set of notebooks I've already created that you'll have access to. But at least in this case, you're going to be able to, create a notebook. You can create a folder to group your notebooks together, which is, if you look in my list, I have PW Workshop, which is a collection of folders. I also have a sample notebook that I got from the Databricks team to, just talking about mounting storage. So I'm basically, I can do any number of things, but in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and create a notebook so you can see what it looks like open. So in this case, when you create a notebook, you got to give it a name. My first notebook is a good name. And you can see you have the options for your default languages: Python, Scala, SQL, and R. Typically speaking, in our what we do in our work, most time is done in Python. So we start with Python. We can switch over to SQL if we need to, and Scala if we want to do that. So just to be clear, Python is the most ubiquitous language when it comes to this. Scala, it will actually perform better in some cases because it's native code effectively in Databricks. I tell with cluster, this is a cluster I had created previously, so I'm gonna have it join this cluster. So you can see here, it's currently running 12 cores, allocated, I can see all the stuff in this information, so I know I got the right cluster. You can run multiple clusters with your environment. So we create the notebook, and here's the first thing, I want you to be able to see. I'm gonna unpin this so we can actually see the whole page here. So welcome to your first notebook. So what can you do? Well, you can type in pretty much anything you want to. So get to edit mode. You can do a comment and say hello world. Does it do anything? No, it doesn't do anything. I admit it. And then you can see here we can run the cell, and it really did nothing. So we could change this up and print hello world. And execute this. And you can see here that this actually runs to the command. It printed it out as a result. And you can see that in this dropdown, realistically, we have the options to run the cell, run all the above, run all below. So we can actually run a whole series of commands. So when you're looking at your notebook today, you can see this is basically command 1. Well, if I wanted to do another command, I can go out here and say print next command. So you can see that I can run that as well, and you can see I get results that went out of the cluster. Really didn't have to do a lot of work, and then you get the information back. So you can keep adding commands to your notebook. So this is really the whole process here, and you can run different kinds of commands. It can be run. You can run a whole notebook, for instance, which is something we commonly do when we're working with data transformation. Machine learning, those kind of things. You can actually do a lot of work. So we're going to jump into this. I am not going to type in front of you the whole time, but I want you to be aware that this is kind of how the notebook works. One other thing, let's go ahead and just so you can see it, we're going to use one of our magic commands, %md, which is markdown. And so now I'm running a different type of command. And let's just do hello world. And enter. And then get out of this command, and you can see it just printed that text for me without the rest of it. So the first two are actually Python code that are showing us, and the third one there is using Markdown. So I shifted it, and you can see that it actually is not really running anything, but it's displaying differently for me. All right, so now that you kind of got a feel for the notebook, let's actually start working with data and get a feel for moving what it looks like to move through a full process here. So we go back to Workspace here. So this workshop that I have built out, basically it runs 5 different notebooks. The first one's an intro to Databricks. The second one is how to set up Azure and get some data. Then we get into the hardcore things like mounting storage, exploring our data, and using widgets, which allows us to create a dashboard and do some display. So there's a lot to cover, and we're going to dig in. We're just going to walk through each of these notebooks so that you can see what we're talking about. We'll probably bounce out to a few things so you can understand what we did. Feel free, this session is being recorded, so make sure that you take advantage of that if you want to review this again. All right. So this is our Pragmatic Works Databricks. So you can see here, like the first one. Say you're doing this internally. This is a markdown command. If I double click, you can see here I have markdown, and I basically made this a header, and I dropped in the location of the logo, which in this case I have it on related to blog posts I'm working on because I have access to that file. I can guarantee its location. So this actually displays it. So whenever you leave, when you type this up, whenever you leave it, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. It basically fulfills that command and makes it happen. The same thing is true here, like in this drop-down list. If I double click here, you can see I got a header signified by the pound symbol. Thanks for joining, and then I have a numbered list. So looking through what we're going to be doing and working with our data today. So for me, this was kind of, you say, why does this matter? Because when I was doing this work and I was trying to actually get this done, it was fun trying to sort out what all the markdown was. So I went and looked at a lot of other people's, and what I'm encouraging you to do is, whenever you see a notebook that's doing something you've never seen before, or you're not familiar with it, you can get in there and edit that notebook and see how the code is written. In this case, things like using the pound symbol to signify a header, right? That's the kind of things that you wouldn't normally do, and sometimes finding it all is not easy. When you prep for this workshop, basically you need your Azure account, and you're going to need Storage Explorer. So Storage Explorer is an easy way to copy files up. We'll show you where we're getting the files. So let's go get some data now. The second notebook that we have that we're created here basically walks us through prepping our data and getting data ready to consume inside of our Databricks notebook. So we already created our Databricks environment. We showed you how to do that in the last one. And then we set up the cluster and made notes around that. So this is all instructions, so you can follow, come back to this notebook and follow the instructions at a later time. So we're going to actually create storage. So inside of the same account that I'm running the current the current Databricks service in, I created a storage account. So I basically created a simple storage account. Let's go home here, and I called it storage, DAWBricks, and this storage account has one container in it. And let's see, where's our containers here? I can container for my Airbnb data. Now, going back to our notebook, so you go and create a storage account and a container for Blob Storage, because you're gonna have to put this data somewhere so you can use it. And we'll need to secure it. I'm gonna come back to that in just a minute, but let's get that data. If we go get that data in there, you can actually, I just loaded data from Airbnb. So the Airbnb site is listed here, the inside airbnb.com, get the data. And you can see here that I got that open. You can go grab all kinds of data. They have zip data. I didn't use the zip data because I wanted to keep it fairly simple and just basically drop in the file information. They have data from multiple locations. Asheville, North Carolina just happened to be one of the early ones I could grab and use, so I did. And basically, we will be working primarily, I believe, with the listings data. It's basically what are the areas available and that kind of stuff. But I pull the rest of these other two in as well, just so I have the information for later use for testing and such. So in my case, if you go to Storage Explorer, so I downloaded those files. Oops, that's the wrong one. And then I proceeded to upload those files, and you can see here I've done it multiple times, so I have numbers on there. I really didn't want the numbers. It kind of messes with my code if I have to go change them. All I did was grab this guy, and I cloned it with a new name and made it the generic names we're looking at here. Also, we created a folder. So keep in mind that folders inside of blob containers are effectively just a path name, not truly folder, but they're good for us to organize. So I actually have I created a folder called Asheville that's to contain the Asheville data to make it easier to find. And then if I wanted to add additional data in, I could. So I could go add a new folder into the container and add more, give me more options of where I drop the data at. Simply upload the data using Storage Explorer after you've connected to your environment, and your data is ready to go. So we now have data in our storage, in our container. You can see here I have the folder, and here's the files that are available to me, and you can see they're exactly the same size. So that's pretty straightforward. Not a whole lot of data gets pulled in, about 4 meg total, give or take. And I now have data ready to go. So now my data is in Blob Storage. You can use Data Lake, you can use a bunch of other ones. This example keeps it simple and just uses Blob Storage in Azure for the data source. All right. The other thing you have to do is go set up a shared access signature key. This allows you, I'll show you that in the mounting. So the instructions are here. I'm not going to walk through the full exercise on that, but you can find that information. Go back to home here. You can actually create a shared access signature here. A couple things, you got to give it access to something. Otherwise, you'll notice the button stays grayed out. For best practice, you basically only want, Databricks only needs to be able to read. So you can unselect all of these. But you need to give it access to the container and the object so it can actually get in and get that data. If you want to just keep it simple, you just allow it access to everything. But overall, it's really going to need just blob, read, and container and object access so that you can actually get to the data in the mount point, which we're going to do. So all that to say, when you create that signature, it's going to generate, let's see here, let's go ahead and do this so you can see what it generates in the list. And in my case, I actually, put a date on this. We're going to put it for tomorrow just so you can see this key get created. I use 30 days, matches, a little bit longer than my 14-day window. And then you generate it, and you can see down here, it generates a bunch of connection strings. This token is the piece that you need. You can copy it by just clicking the copy to keyboard clipboard button over here because you'll have to use it later. You'll have to also understand the syntax of how these things are built. So like you need to know the storage, UW Databricks, blobcore.net, that's going to be relevant for work that you're doing, and so on. So once you set up the shared access, one thing to be aware of, once you leave this page, this is non-recoverable key. So if you leave this page, forget to copy something, you'll need to recreate it. So just be aware of that. All right. So once we have our connection string and we're ready to go, you're like, well, we haven't done anything yet with data. Well, first thing we have to do is we got to mount our storage. So creating mount points basically is a definition of where the data is located and can be consumed by Databricks and by our cluster. So this is important to understand that Databricks itself is really a compute operation. So it doesn't really do its own storage. It basically can use the storage wherever we have it at. In this case, Blob Storage, or you can, like I said, use Data Lake, and you can connect to other types of data and mount your data from other ways. So we are going to now we're going to dig into some hands-on with your blob data. So a couple things here. The DB utilities are what we're going to use to mount the storage. These functions are basically gives us a basic understanding of what's there. You can actually, let's start running some code here. So this is this DB utils help will actually list out what's available. So if you just run this, it's going to give us a list. So running help actually tells us, hey, we have, here's the credentials information, file system information that we're going to use, and so on. We're going to spend most of our time working with the file system because we're going to set up a mount point using that information. And you can see here, once you know in the next level command, we can actually look at what's next. When in this case, we do the same thing. It's going to tell us what's available to us from a file system utility, including the mount work that we're going to do and how the syntax is. So this help is kept up to date by Databricks team and the Azure team, and it lets you work within, and understand what you have going on. So most of your commands have this option. All right, so the next set of code, what I want to call out a couple things. One is obviously right now you're seeing my key. which is fine because it's dated and it'll go away. But I want you to be aware there's a few things around this mount, and that I have a comment, the comment code in here for this reason. So this is what we're going to do is basically we're going to do a try with an exception, and basically if you run this again after you've mounted it once, it won't try to mount it again. You won't get an error. It'll pass the error along and say, ignore the error. So if you look at the code that we have here, what we're looking at is what's the source. So WASBS is the signifier for the blob storage type. If you're using data lake, it can be different. But basically this says, hey, I'm looking for my Airbnb data container, which is located in this storage account. So if you think of it right there, that's my current source. I'm gonna create a mount point. The mount point is a reference that is used in Databricks and the rest of the time in order to access the data. And the extra configs, this is basically, hey, here's the full length of what I'm gonna do from a file system. It's, Azure, we're using an SAS key, here's my container, here's my storage account, and then I need my my SAS key value. So this part here, the second part, is copied from your SAS token here. So this is a copy and paste. You copy and paste that in here. What I have up here in the parameters is a lot of information letting you know how to do all this, so you can actually make sure that you have the information ready. So we're going to do a try. We're going to try to load this up. If our exception says the directory is already mounted, it'll ignore it, and then it'll let us know. Now, I am not currently mounted, just so we're clear. I do have an additional command down here letting you know that you can actually unmount this, which I do for demo purposes. But for today, we currently have not mounted this code, so let's run this command window. And you will see down here at the bottom, it's currently running the command, and we'll get some information here when it completes the mount. This one we actually have to wait for because I've already mounted it, so here's open, there we go. So it's initiating the Spark job. You can expand this just to see what's going on. So it says, hey, it's got doing 4 things, it's completed. We got the message, so when I did the print to just say, hey, it's done, it's successfully mounted, great. So it let me know that we're good, and we're ready to mount. Now, if we want to confirm, let's look at some commands. So if you remember, the magic command we had was we can actually go interact with the file system. So now that we have a mount point, it's kind of the root of what we're doing. And so we need to basically, let's look at what's in our container. And this will actually go out and run, and then it's going to return back the fact that we have a folder at this path. So the name of the folder, the size, all that's here. Next up, so now we know there's a folder. Let's go look at the contents of the folder. So it's going to go run again on the cluster. It finds that, hey, look at that. I found all these folders. So if you recall, this is exactly what we expect to see. This is the information we have stored out there, and we have duplicates because we got rid of the numbers in there. So now I've successfully mounted. I use this to make sure everybody's aware, especially early on, when you're trying to make sure things are working. These are some commands and make sure you're actually getting access to the data as expected, and you're able to access all the objects. So the last command I have here is I want to see the beginning side of, basically I'm going to pull a part of the file. So let's go and run this, and we're going to use a head command to do that. And you can see here we basically, I forget how many rows this pulls, but it's not a huge amount. But it gives me an idea of, hey, this is the data I got. I can look in here and say this looks like what I kind of expect to see. It's all comma separated values, which we all can guess the kind of issues that might cause us. But it's basically, hey, it's going to pull back the equivalent of 1K of data. So, or actually, it's a little more than that. Sorry. So it's pulling back that information. It just kind of gives us, hey, I can see the file. So what we've done, congratulations. At this point, if you are able to do this with your own data and your own sample, you will have actually connected to the data, mounting storage, and now we can do some more interesting things. Remember, we're still our first notebook that we're creating. So now we're going to talk about exploring the data. We're actually using PySpark in the demos I have here. remember that Databricks is capable of using a variety of different languages to work with and manipulate data. And you can basically pull in, like Python has a huge block of libraries that can be used as well, especially if you think in terms of data science or if you're doing specific manipulation. We have used this to evaluate files, make sure they're actually correct, make sure the data in them is correct, fix time, date time fields to standardize them. There are a lot of things that you can do in this code. We're keeping it simple. We're basically going to interact with the data that we pulled in from Airbnb, and we're going to look at it. So we're going to start by saying, hey, we're going to use PySpark. So we want to actually import those functions. So this allows us to do that. And so now we're going to be able to use PySpark, in particular PySpark SQL. So that allows us to write SQL against the code we're about to do. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to read the data into a DataFrame. I don't need to go into this one. We've already done this. This is basically listing out the files we have. When we create the DataFrame, basically we're telling Spark to go out, or Databricks to go out and read the data into the DataFrame that we're calling raw DF, which is basically, this is the lowest level of DataFrame that we can get. We're just like, hey, just go dump this into my DataFrame, which is effectively a dataset object that we have. The options that we're using here. So we're using an option for header, and we're saying, hey, our file has a header. We know that from investigating it previously. And we want to go ahead and infer the schema. So go ahead and look at the data. Think of this like when you dump data in Excel and it tries to figure out what the schema is or what the data types are and all that. We're going to do this. We're going to let Spark figure out kind of where that's at. And then we're letting you know, hey, this file type is CSV, so it knows it's looking for comma separated files. It can handle tab and so on. You just have to make sure you specify it. The extension on the file is less relevant than the specifying how it's organized. So like if this were stored as listings.txt, we can say, hey, that file is organized as a CSV, so we want to pull the data in there. So what this does, it's going to load it into a data frame in Spark and get it ready to go for us. Now, we're using Python. I want to be really clear, a couple things about Python to be aware of. You notice that this is formatted a certain way. That is because Python is both case sensitive and white space sensitive. So as you're working with it, I've actually gotten errors before saying, hey, I expect an indent, like the try catch previously, or the try, it's not try catch, but the try except. That syntax required everything to be tabbed appropriately, and you have to, the white space matters. So I want to be, if you're unfamiliar with Python and you're running some what you feel are weird errors, chances are you're dealing with either case sensitive commands or you're dealing with the white space not being correct in the command you're running. So, all right, let's load up this data frame. So right now it's going out, it's reading our file, and it's done. So way to go. We've loaded up our data file. So what's in it? So the display command will actually show us what's in this data frame. So we'll run this. And you can see it right away, it organizes it as a table. We have the headers as expected. So ID, the name, the host ID, and let's see, scroll over a little bit, gotta get in there. We can see the host name, neighborhood group. This is some additional information, Latin long, so if you want to map it, it's all there. The room types, the price, minimum number of nights you can use. If they have reviews, how many reviews, when's the last review they had, and so on. So you can see here that this is all information is pre-organized for us. Now let's see here if they fix this. Looks like they have. There is a data issued, and it may not show up right away. Sometimes they have comma separated data. Looks like they fixed it. That just gets out of whack. So what happens when you use free data? Like we all know, clean data is not a real thing. You have to actually make sure it's clean when you go check it. So now we have this basically in a data frame in Spark, and we're good to go. And so what's next? Well, beyond that, we can actually create a database and tables and really interact with this like it's a table inside a database, like we're talking about, right? So we're going to basically use some Spark SQL to do this. Now you'll notice right away we use a different magic command to create this stuff. We're gonna go and say, hey, if this table exists, so basically clean up the mess I may have made previously. You know, drop the table, then drop the database. Now, the reason I'm doing that, if you can't just drop the database, you have to drop all the objects. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to create a new database, or recreate the database, called Airbnb. Now, these databases are part of Spark and Spark SQL. They're not actually the same as what you consider full relational database, but they allow us to interact with the data a certain way. Because like everything in this type of world, a lot of it's schema after the fact. So basically the data is stored in a certain way. We're going to apply schema and rules to schema and then interact with that schema. But it doesn't necessarily mean the data is properly stored the way we expect it to be. So we're going to run this. And if you caught it as it was flying by, this is actually using Hive constructs on the inside of Spark to actually build our database and table. So I'm actually creating a Hive database if you're familiar with Hive and have worked with Hadoop before. So now we're going to do a few different things here. So our data frame we're going to write it out to our database. So we're going to write it to a table called listings. So this command says, hey, we're going to write it out. We're going to override anything that might be there. We're going to format it as Parquet, which is a most optimal storage option for Databricks, the one that we typically want to be in as Parquet. And then we're going to create this table called Airbnb.listings on the Airbnb database that we've created. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay. So now that we have this table created called listings, let's start working with the table. So this is an opportunity to explore. So we're going to say, hey, I'm going to create a new data frame that's going to go pull my data from listings, and I want to see the schema. So remember, we inferred the schema before. What did it actually do? This lets us know what it believes the data is. So, and you can see that for the most part, it gathered the right things, right? So the ID is a string, name is a string. You get into price, it's a string, probably means there's a data issue there. Minimum nights is a number, and so on. So it basically said, hey, this is what we think it is. We can actually go and put a schema around the table if we wanted to, but for the sake of what we're doing today, this is actually just fine. So we're going to be able to have a data frame with this information. We now know how it's organized. So what's in it? Basic. So one thing is we're not just going to display the data straight up. In this case, we actually put it in a data frame. But let's see what it looks like. It really should look about the same as it did before, right? So here we go. It does. We're in pretty much the same type of construct as we saw in the previous data frame. Now here's what's interesting. We can actually go and say, hey, describe a field. So one of the things we often do when we're doing ETL work, sometimes we don't know what the data looks like. So price was odd. It came up as text. So I wonder why that is. Let's run this. And what this does is it's going to run some basic information and say, hey, what should we know? So when we look at this, you'll notice right away that a part of this found that, hey, there's 2,400 of them. There's an average, a standard deviation. The minimum value is 1, but the maximum value is entire home/apartment. Once again, we now find that we have bad data. So you can use the describe function to interrogate fields that either were inferred incorrectly or you're trying to figure out why. This probably means there's an entire row or more than one row where a comma was not properly designated and the data is now offset in a bad way. So just be aware, this gives you an opportunity, just one of the many valuable ways of going out and investigating data we're pulling in, because you're looking for things that aren't correct, and you may either have to correct them or eliminate them depending on what you're trying to accomplish in your data load. All right, let's run some SQL then. So right now, I can actually, using the SQL command, I can run directly against my table and do some aggregation. So I'm going to say, hey, I want to get the zip code, find out how many there are, show me the listings, and group them by the zip code, which is in the neighborhood column. So let's just run this real quick. And this will pop up a nice little summary, because remember, we're only pulling from one area, right? So Once again, you'll see that we have some issues around the data. There's no way that 35.57179, that's not a zip code. Neither is this one. These look like Latin long values. Look like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 or 5, you know, a few correct ones and a couple that where the commas obviously have caused us some problems. So we can start to get that and say, okay, well, that's not good. What can I do? Let's clean up some data. Now, we're going to use SQL to clean up the data because we're going to basically look in places where it's greater than 100. We know a zip code is bigger than 100. We know the Latin longs are wrong. So let's clean it up and let's order it by our neighborhood as well. So in this case, we're basically saying, hey, go ahead and give us a zip code again. And we only want zip codes where we should convert to integer. So we should be good to go. So you can see here, some of the stuff is uses language as more programmatic. So whereas like in SQL Server, we might have chose like substring or cast, those kind of things. In this case, these functions in Spark SQL are similar to what you do like if you're writing code. So let's just run this. And right away, you're going to see that, oh, wait a minute, we got these results back as a chart as opposed to just text. Well, that's because we have the option with Spark and in a notebook, we can actually put this in a couple different ways. Now, map would work, but we'd have to tell it where the map fields are, but you could say, let's look at an area chart. So I realize it's not really relevant for the data we're working with, but at least now you can see you can do other things with the data and display it right away, helping you understand and visualize the data a little differently. So this gives you some options there. That totally doesn't work. You know, you get the idea. So we can use the world's greatest chart, which is pie chart, or we can go right back to our bar chart and be happy. So now we have, we understand where we are with zip codes. We can see this information and go from there. All right. So now we're like, okay, we got the data. We know we got some bad data. What else can I do? So we are reaching near the end of our time. So I'm going to kind of fly through the last notebook here. This is introducing widgets. So widgets are ways to visualize your data, pass along a notebook, share information, and really do some dashboarding with notebooks at a basic level. Now, this is not a replacement for Power BI, but this is a great way to explore and share information about your data when it's really about a team of data scientists, for instance, who really are just looking to investigate and share information they find, but not necessarily be the end game. So we're going to look at that. Like before, you can run the widgets help command to see all the types of widgets. We're going to start here. So we're going to create a data frame using Spark SQL that basically pulls in all of our room types. So if we cast the room type as double, this is a very interesting thing. So if you recall, we had the problem with some of that data. If you cast a room type as an incorrect value, or it can't be cast to that value or that data type, it will actually return null. So in this case, anytime I get a number, anything that can be cast as a number, because the room type shouldn't be a number, it's going to return it as null. And then and it's also going to say, hey, if the room type itself is null, I'm not pulling that either. And then I'm going to display what I have for my room types. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is basically going to pull all that up and display those room types for us so we can see what we get. And here you can see there are actually 4 room types that are available to us. All right. Now we're going to map this to let's see where, to a table, a Lambda table that basically says, hey, here's a list that we want to do and do a collection. And then this command 5, we're actually going to drop it into a widget. Now the widget, you can already see the widgets here. Once it's here, I can't make it go away at the moment. I'd have to delete it, but you can see here I have my widget. You're like, well, what's bid's that? Well, let's look through this. So first of all, we're gonna go ahead and run and map this stuff out to the rooms. And you can see here, rooms is basically the collection or an array. And we're going to come in here, we're gonna add, update our widget drop down, which we already have, so that's no big deal there. Now, what can we do with that? If you look here, I can actually use room types, which is the same name as my widget up here, my drop down, as a dynamic filter. So if I run this right now, it's going to only pull hotel rooms. So you can see here, my room type is a hotel room. If I change this to private room and run it again, it will honor the setting that I have up above. So if you're going to create something and create a number of widgets and do other things with this, you can actually add some filters at the top using this widget technique and have the ability to filter the data that you're actually running against to allow people to interact with the data a little bit differently. All right. Let's see here. I'm just making sure I have time right. Okay. So the other two commands here basically are looking at just a couple of different ways to aggregate the data. So we'll show you these. And really, this is about displaying the data. So like in this case, we show this is a simple bar chart. And the bottom one, I think, I can't remember which one I run that. Yeah, so we just did this as a room type. So as part of this process, you can, once you have all this information the way you want it, then, let's see here. You've had the ability to create this. You can actually end up creating a dashboard as well, which can display different pieces of these objects on here. And I don't think I have that set up today, so that's fine. That's not an option for another day, is actually dropping these all into a dashboard. But this is these four they technically are 4 notebooks, but this group of notebooks gives you a good introduction to what you can do in Databricks and kind of get you kicked off and started. So like I said, I'll be making this available. The thing is sky's the limit, right? You can do a lot more than what we just showed, but hopefully this gives you an opportunity to see how to create your first notebook. And as I said before, we'll get the content to you. I'm going to look at our questions. I'm sure you've had a few along the way. So let's let me go through here. So first of all, so can Databricks do the same job as Data Factory for data movement? I'm going to say sort of. So you could use Databricks for to replace Data Factory, but we typically use Databricks with Data Factory. So we use Data Factory as the high-level workflow engine. We execute Databricks jobs. Prior to Microsoft introducing some of the features they have in the new versions of Data Factory, in particular, where they added the ability to create ETL in that, we typically use Data Factory for a lot of the transformation work, or Databricks, I'm sorry, Databricks for the transformation work that you couldn't do in Data Factory. So to be clear, Databricks is always going to be the more sophisticated option. If you're going to end up doing a lot of scripting or a lot of, you have to do a lot of heavy lift and heavy work, or if you have run into a process that needs a significant scale out approach, Databricks is a great choice for that. It also goes into, it also is around the code that you're using. If you're familiar with Python, it becomes an easy transition for you. The sample books are being used in the demo will be available on my blog post at dataonwheels.com. They should be available by the end of the week. And you can, so you're asking about Lake or Blob, Anuruj, you mount all kinds of data points through there. The key is, well, realistically, you can connect to a lot of different things. The reality is that you should be doing most of this in Lake or Blob, frankly, because that's what that's designed for. There are ways to connect to other data sources, but I would say it's more, I'd be more focused around data lake or blob storage at this point. If you delete the cluster, yes, everything you create will be lost. It all has to be recreated. Without the cluster running, that is a key thing here. So you notice how this thing shuts down after 120 days, which is great for development and some of that stuff. But what we have learned when you go to run this, like if you're going to run Databricks clusters as a primary source of data, say you're running Power BI against it or doing other analysis with it, you need the cluster to keep running. The key there is managing your minimum and maximum workers to, so it actually scales down, scales up based on need. But it's hard to shut something off. It's like anything when it comes to people, when they become dependent on the data in that format, you need to plan for what the clusters need to look like. Case sensitivity, I believe that's true. It's just Python because we actually changed the language type from Python. So keep in mind R is case sensitive. I believe Scala is case sensitive and Python is case sensitive and white space sensitive. So I believe that SQL is not in those cases, and it runs regardless. Can we write into SQLDB using Azure Databricks? Yeah, let me think. I think you can. You just have to set up a target for that. So I don't have an example of that right now. I know we have some other sessions around that. That would be a good one. I'll try to follow up with that one and figure out the right answers for that, because I know we're writing into Data Warehouse, but I believe we're using Azure Data Factory and Polybase in most cases for that. Is Data Factory behind the scenes a Databricks Spark cluster? Yes, there is a Spark cluster. I think it might be a Databricks cluster for one of the types of transforms, and it has to do with the transformation technology behind there is leveraging the same concepts. I don't know how much Microsoft has deviated from that, and I know that there are a couple different options in Databricks around transformations, but it's definitely in play there. And two more here. Yes, you can export the data for sure. Typically what we did is when we're transforming, we write it back to a different bucket inside of Data Lake, for instance. When we do a full implementation, we write the data lakes and we can import that using a copy command, and ADF is typically what we do. You know, use the best tool for the job is kind of what we're after. And I don't know about the SFTP question. I'd have to go look that up. I'm not sure if there's a specific library for that. All right, Crystal, I'll hand it back to you. We're at time. And if there's other questions, you can fire them to me. My email address was on the presentation. You'll be able to get that at the beginning, by looking at the recording. And as I said, look for the Databricks notebook to become available on my blog post, because I can put that with the answers to other questions there.
All right, thank you so much, Steve. We appreciate you hosting today. Like Steve mentioned before, you guys will receive the recording. This is all recorded. You guys will receive that tomorrow around noon Eastern Standard Time in your email box. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Steve. We're happy to help. Thank you guys so much for attending, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. And again, Steve, thank you so much for hosting. We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, sir. Have a good day.